Good morning, everyone. Hi, Brooke. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have new lighting. Does that change anything?
You look great.
All right.
We've got CG joining us, and I know that we've got people here with us already, and we are live and recording for uncomfortable but necessary conversations. And I am so excited to be able to have this opportunity to connect. Well, for a number of reasons, but because I don't really get uncomfortable a lot. And a lot of people, a lot of other people do. And so I felt like this was a great way. First of all, this is like a spinoff of my own podcast, but to bring in two very special people to me. And I'm going to introduce them, but I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves because I probably would go off into a whole spiel and tangent because I'm super emotional and like warm and fuzzy and semi like just emotional today. Just with the loss of Chadwick Boseman and just going on, but this is going to be such a cathartic conversation, and I'm so excited to have it with you two. CG Gamble is my bestie, and my daughter's godmom, and she's my therapist on the side. She don't even know it yet. Driving to work and just blah, 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 blah. And she's there and listens. And so I'm going to let you talk about who you are and what you bring to the table to this conversation. And then we have my other counterpart, Brooke Buys, just another good, dear family friend. Like her crazy crew and my crazy crew, we just do great things together. And I love all of the things that we always talk about, and you always bring such a fresh perspective. So CG, go ahead and give us a little bit of a background on who you are.
Okay. All right. So can you guys hear me well? All
Mm-hmm.
right. So I am CG Gamble. I lead with that I am a mom first. I'm a mom of two boys, age 5 and 2. I am a wife with a husband of 11 years, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Michigan. I have a private practice called Maternal Counseling Services, where I focus in specifically on perinatal mental health, and all that is are pregnant and postpartum moms. While I see women of all stages of their life, that's where I focus in. And so, maternal counseling services, about 98% of our population are pregnant and postpartum moms. I am the best friend of Nicole for a long time. We won't say the number,
I don't even know.
but I met Nicole, I think, middle school when we were doing the high jump, no, the
And
hurdles.
I failed. Don't be telling people all my business. I told
I
my
won't.
kids.
I won't. Um, so we're doing the hurdles, and then I got the opportunity to get to know her more in high school, and we became best friends starting freshman year cheer team. So a long history, but that's a small summary of who I am in a small nutshell.
Yes. And Brooke, we'll go ahead and go with you.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Brooke. I Ann Arbor, Michigan, born and raised in the Kalamazoo area. I too am the mother of boys, three of them, 8, 10, and 11, going on what maybe feels like 26 sometimes.
Yep.
I'm not quite sure where.
Yes, Bobo and Julio get down.
Yeah, so it's a very highly energetic life that I'm leading, and it's a lot of fun with those three boys. My husband and I have been together for almost 12 or 13 years, and I'm a social worker at my heart. Currently, I own a business, Blend Health. We're located in Kalamazoo, Detroit, really all over the place now, especially now more than ever. So we focus on a lot of integrative, holistic health services and offerings. We've got about 7 licensed social workers and psychologists on our staff, and we really just work one person at a time, one day at a time, meeting people where they're at. My particular passion and interest and research for my PhD is in psychology and social work around gender responsive approaches to mental health and addiction. So I'm really excited to be here and to connect. I met Nicole when we were both very, very, very pregnant with our youngest boys. And
Yep.
I knew I was on, no, was it with Ace?
It was with Ace.
Okay. Yep. And yeah, as she shared, we've had a lot of really great experiences with her family. I love our kids together. And I'm just excited to be here and ready to, I don't get uncomfortable very often either. So I know I might make other people uncomfortable, but so maybe that will happen for me today. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, you know what, though? That's the thing. That's the reason why I am having this conversation. And first of all, that's the other reason why I started the podcast, is because it was something that I felt like, especially right now with all that was going on as a business owner and me as well as a mother of 4. And you guys have all boys. I've got literally all girls except for I got my guy, my one dude. And so like when Brooke's boys come to the house and say, Ace is like in boy heaven for like a series of days, and then he goes through withdrawals again. And so I feel for him in that space. But because I do have a son, you know, living here in Minneapolis when George Floyd happened, my clothing store is downtown. And I remember it was COVID, and there were so many things that I had to put in place for people to come into my store to shop safe. And I had the hardest time having to jump through hoops just to get people to come and shop safe. And I was wanting to protect them. I wanted to protect myself. But then I had a moment of pause because my family wasn't being protected outside the doors. I was jumping through more hoops in my store for other people than everybody is outside of my store. And so for me, I really wanted to start that conversation because I thought that it was necessary. And I felt like it should have been, we should have been having these discussions long before now. But, you know, a lot of times it is danced around. And so one of the things that I wanted to spend some time with you guys is getting your fresh perspectives and your professionals. So yes, you're my friends, but you're professional friends. Like you're my professional friends, and then we're like friends. So
well, I know I'm wearing both hats today because I always tell people, I don't know if CG experiences this, but I'm like, no, I'm not psychoanalyzing you. Like the switch is off, people. Like I don't always have that hat on, but yes. I think we'll gladly wear both today.
Yes, exactly. And CG she prefaces, okay, you want the professional answer or you want your friend answer? Because you've got two answers. There's definitely those two answers. But one of the thing that I wanted to talk about are, you know, some of the things that go on a day-to-day basis that we don't necessarily, well, we know, we recognize, but people might not understand what they are. And that's microaggressions. I think that, again, understanding things from a common ground is imperative for understanding, because my understanding of something could be different than yours. And so what I wanted to do was, first of all, like on the podcast, we come on and we define something, have a small discussion about it, and then we're going to end the discussion answering any questions that are in the chat box. Please, you guys, make sure you are asking questions, anything that comes up, but then also leaving and empowering people to take on what it is that we're discussing here and take it into their lives and make a difference, and start uncomfortable conversations, because until you get uncomfortable, nothing changes. It's kind of like going to the gym and you pay all that money and you walk on the treadmill. Like you walk on the treadmill and go home. That's not uncomfortable. Your pants are still going to fit the same when you leave. So I want to get an understanding. What do you guys think? What is your definition of microaggressions?
I'll jump in. So I'm a person that is very visual, and so I use a lot of analogy. When I think of microaggressions, I think of it's a soft rub. It's sandpaper. And so sandpaper, when when you look at it, it doesn't seem that significant. The fibers, it's not that significant, right? However, the longer there is a rub, the deeper the wound. And so microaggressions are basically like a sandpaper that continues to wear. It's a wearing away at something. And so, what I would have people think about is are there things that are happening to you or that you are doing that continually have a small impact, because it's not the large things, it's the small things that create that impact. So when I think of microaggressions specifically, I would have people visualize sandpaper. It's something very small and expensive, yet it does the job and can wear things away.
That's good. That was good. You are visual. You should be a teacher.
No.
You said that fast.
I'm a
What
teacher
about
at heart.
yes? I mean, but you have to think about it though too. Like that helps a lot of people when you can visualize it. What about you, Brookie?
Yeah. I think I've used a similar scab, really, or a bad gash, and it would eventually leave a scar if you are picking, or if someone else is picking. So I've often described that to folks in terms of how either they're not tending to it or how others could be picking at it without their, knowledge. And, especially when it's, I think the most slippery part of this is the biases around like folks that don't. It is so harmful because they're not, and I think this is tricky, they're not conscious, they're not stopping and practicing and taking present moment. And I think that that's what we have to do now more than ever, because it is in it and there, it's part of it. And so the people that are picking at it, I think that's the other consequence of this is some folks will, I don't realize that they're picking at the scab, and they don't realize it and they don't mean any harm. And sure, they don't mean harm. You don't think they mean harm, but there is harm. And it will create, like, you said, CG, in terms of a scar deeper and deeper. And that implicit bias is there. And that's the dangerous part of that. So
I think one of the things that I am a big proponent of is, well, if you can look behind me, reading, right? And so one of my favorite authors in this moment, in this time, is Ibram Kendi. And he talks about microaggressions in How to Be Anti-Racist. And, it's the #1 bestseller these days, right? Everybody needs to learn how to understand it. And we're learning, whether it's through podcasts or reading. And there was another one called So You Want to Talk About Race. And I think that hers, and I can't remember the author of it, actually, it's around here somewhere. But the point is, the way that she explained it was kind of like standing and having someone walk by you every single day, step on your foot and say they don't mean it. But it happens the same way all the time, every day. Then it's the next person that looks like them that does the same thing, and they say they don't mean that too. And then by the time you get to the end of all of the microaggressions, it's just boiling down to flat out like racism, because you're being not, you're not being noticed, or you're coming under attack. And then from a verbal standpoint, Ibram Kendi talks about the fact that microaggressions are actually nothing about them are micro. Like it's like a what is it? Double negative? Is that what it's called when you say things that kind of yeah
Contradicts?
So, yeah. And I when he said that, I thought that was really, really interesting too. And so for me, I want to know, how have you seen microaggressions play out in your workplace setting? I know that we're all three of us are small business owners, which is, again, super dope, but we all have our experiences. I know that, whether it's through conference calls or, just daily interactions with the people that we come into contact with. And then I'll share a little bit of mine. I got a list, so I can pull from mine on any time, but I want to hear from you guys. What do you experience in your world, in your space, even from a counseling perspective, as it relates to microaggressions? CG, whether towards you, or you've seen it happen towards others?
So microaggressions in the workplace. So as a counselor, I have individuals who come in and see me. Now they see me via telehealth, and sometimes their support person may come as well. Counseling is a different kind of, I don't want to say beast, but it's a different creature. Because when someone comes to counseling, there is a level of vulnerability that they've already hit that allows them to have an openness. However, this is what I preface this with. Individuals who come to counseling have already a rawness. They generally are recommended by their OBGYN, their primary care physician, and they may not look on my website. So,
Surprise!
if you are seeing me visually, you'll see I am a person of color. If you are not seeing me visually, I am a person of color. So with that, when they come in, to be honest, a lot of my population are people who do not look like me. And because of that, if they are not aware of who I am, when they get there, they may be surprised. However, it the impact isn't hurtful because I come in knowing that each person already is vulnerable. And so what I do is I work with that vulnerability. And every intake, I let them know. I know that you don't know me from a paint can. You don't know me from a paint can. You don't know me, and I know that there's going to be a level of trust that we have to build. However, when you are hurting, you do not care where that help comes from. And because I am typically a person that they refer to, there's a level of openness. So I summarize it in this way. The microaggressions that I see are individuals who are surprised. However, what microaggressions do is they cut off the ability to have vulnerability and connection, which is imperative in counseling. And so if they choose to allow that to come down, then they'll work to get the care that they need. The beautiful thing about counseling is because there's such a vulnerability, and vulnerability breeds connection, i.e. Brene Brown, then there's a level of microaggression that comes down. There's that sandpaper doesn't feel as rough that they may be using. And I get to also impact them as well as their family in a different way. I have a small impact in their life that can help view people of color differently.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And I think that that's one of the things that motivates me on a day-to-day is just trying to be, when you have people who have biases and have preconceived notions, I try to be the opposite of what they think that might be. But I feel like that's not also my job to do that, because realistically, you should take individuals for individuals versus trying to lump a group of people together by commonality, because everyone in a group of people are so different. But what about you, Brooke?
Yeah, I guess when I was thinking about this question, I was reflecting on our clients and our families and microaggressions in terms of, like, when you think of marginalized people of color, women, LGBTQ, in terms of how it often reinforces the characteristic that those populations are weak in terms of rather than sort of that victim stage. So what I see is just the constant cycle. Well, I've got to zip this rubber suit on. I just got to get thicker skin because this is just going to keep happening. And I mean, we see it. So the rubber suit model, there's a really beautiful poem by Adrienne Rich that does a great job with that. But, you can't put on enough. I mean, that rubber suit, the way in which we have to unpeel it over and over and over again with these folks is pretty incredible. So, that's what it comes to my mind, and how if that sandpaper has been rubbing and rubbing and rubbing, that rubber suit is so thick, and there's so many complex systems, whether we're working with a family system, in their home, in the workplace, or with individuals. It's just what I see is that it reinforces, I got to just have thicker skin. I got to zip up this rubber suit. I better just get used to people stepping on my feet. And it reinforces this characteristic that we are weak, we are victims, and that we're not there are no opportunities within the scope of these marginalized populations. So it's wild, and the cycles and the trauma associated with it, depending on the population, makes that rubber suit even, I mean, it's not even rubber anymore. I don't even know what the suit is when there's trauma piled on it, and when the trauma isn't acknowledged, when the trauma hasn't been resolved, there's so much unpacking to do, you know? So that's my perspective in terms of what I see in our client population. You know, we work in a large group of therapists and have a lot of, you know, relationships with community organizations and education systems. And, you know, we get into a lot of different conversations around this topic as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's what stuck out to me, and that story and that narrative, and that it's our responsibility to make that very clear now more than ever, to be able to point that out when we're talking about that reinforcement and that narrative and that rubber suit, and what are we doing? What's my responsibility as a business owner with my peers and my colleagues to make sure that the intersectionality, the lens that we're looking
Mm-hmm.
through with our clients, that we are making it abundantly clear, not only in a way that is over and over and over again, you know, that we have even harder work to do. So.
I always love talking to you in regards to these kinds of concepts anyway, because I feel like you do a lot of self-reflection. And I mean, as people, that's not what we normally do, because it's always, we see the other person, right? And again, and for anyone watching, Brooke isn't a person of color. So realistically for me, first of all, that's very refreshing. That you can take that pause, and that you and I honestly have the conversation, the Black person, white person conversations that most people are afraid of, or, you know, don't know how to engage in, or don't have that person. I feel like we always have that opportunity to take it a little bit deeper. And when I heard you say intersectionality, I was like, hey, we get to talk about that next. Put that on, because that's another one that's a big, big deal that people don't understand and don't recognize how much it impacts their lives. Moving on, one of the things that I also had here in my notes is are the varying forms of microaggressions. And as a Black business owner, they happen very subtly to me. They have in the past, and they've happened very blatantly. And then I don't know, do you drop the micro when it becomes blatant?
Well, you know, I would say I'll let the two of you keep responding to that. But another piece that I was going to just, again, put out there and hope that it can be focused on is just the research around microaggressions physiologically and neurologically on people's mental health, anger, depression, substance use, productivity. I mean, it is significant. The DSM doesn't have it anywhere in there, does it, CG? The DSM, we'll leave that for a separate conversation, whether we want to rewrite that purple book or not. But that is significant and so disconnected sometimes, at least when I see it in the field often. It's pocketed in separate categories in terms of, well, microaggressions over here and the mental health diagnosis is over here. No, it's so intertwined. And research is, yeah, like I said, with the physiological and neurological effects. But I think to your point, I'll let the two of you speak about aggression versus microaggression.
It all feels the same. It hurts.
Yeah. You know, can I take a stab at this one?
Go for it.
Yeah.
With that, I actually have been reflecting on that, because the realization is words have power. And so I look at it in two different ways. The first is we as human beings have the tendency to want to label something, because if we don't have a label for it, it feels too chaotic. There's some uncertainty there. If we can't name what it is, we cannot put it in a category. And typically we do not like things that are uncategorized. We have difficulty with the discomfort of it. So labeling feels really important to human beings. Yet I want to flip that. I want to reframe it just a little bit. Labeling is important when you label, when you are appropriately labeling who a person is, not what they are experiencing. And then I'm going to get deeper on what I mean. Because it is not what the title is. It's not what the label is. It's how that person feels. I'm a TikToker. I don't do the TikToks, but I love watching TikTok.
It's kind of funny though.
I know, right? And so I reflect on a lot. Sometimes I could be too deep for my own self. But there was a TikTok when it was talking about the different languages. And the person was saying blue is so similar in all the different languages except for Spanish. It's similar in French, it's similar in English, but in Spanish, it is so not blue, it's azul. Now, why does this matter? Because blue is the same color. It can be labeled anything.
Mm-hmm.
People out where we don't even know can label blue whatever they want. However, it's still blue. Perception is in the eye of the beholder. It's how we see. We don't see honestly with our eyes. We see through our eyes. Our mind processes the color. And so the realization is, the question is, microaggressions, is there a contradiction? Is that the appropriate word? But the whole emphasis is, how does it make a person feel?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of if I call it microaggressions, trauma, abuse, wearing, sandpaper, rubber suit, it is how a person is feeling and experiencing it. And we can't label a person's experience. We have to listen to a person's experience.
That's my best friend. That's because hey, that's facts. And that's the reason why it's sad to say, but I feel like George Floyd was the catalyst to these conversations. And it's been happening for, centuries, this type of thing. Microaggression, aggression, murder, killing, accidental murder, but the list goes on. But the point of it is that, like, until you recognize that someone else's experience is not up for discussion, it's just up for you to hear, we're going to always go through what we're going through in this moment. We have a couple, these questions in the chat box are a little deep. CJ, that was like right on. That made my insides very happy. No, seriously, because you don't understand, like, when you're trying to explain it and in your heart of hearts, it's like, how can you ever tell me my feelings? No, that's not what they meant. Or no, I didn't mean it that way. It doesn't matter what you meant. It's how I felt. Oh, isn't that like a communication thing? Didn't we learn that in college, you guys? The receiver thing. I remember the picture. That's all I got.
Well, and it would be interesting to see how many folks, if they choose to take a hot minute, pause, and consider when they walk into your store, for instance, Nicole, there is some level of they are uncomfortable or feeling insecure. That is a loop that goes through. They are more concerned about their bubble and their perception or how they're feeling. So in order to make their insecurities and uncomfortable, I think that's where these jokes and compliments come through. And that is like just this loop that just becomes normalized for individuals that passively have like a Rolodex of microaggressions, but it's so connected to the insecurities, and the insecurity piece is something that is going to be such a huge battle for white people. Their inability to kind of give insecurity a hug and realize that if I make this decision because I need to learn, I need to sink into this, I need to get uncomfortable, I need to sort through this, it may affect your social life. It may affect how parents see you on the playground. It may affect a lot of things, but hopefully it starts to affect that we can treat one another better. But that insecure meets elitism is a nasty hybrid that I think it's there and it's in it, and fogs their ability to be able to be in the present moment and to take a minute, and there's a lot to be done there.
Yeah. So. Well, that's my thing though. And I think that what you just said was literally called allyism, if that's the word, or being an ally, because you're putting something on the line. If you're, you know what I mean? It's one thing to say, oh, I'm with you, but it's another thing to say, I'm with you, let me show you how. And you put your actions and your words in alignment, and then you are the change. And you know that that's a quote, be the change you want to see, or whatever. You will be that change you want to see, because you will be affecting your own ability to understand someone else's reality. But then you will be that experience will be also rubbing off on hopefully the moms on the playground, right? Like that's who you.
Yeah, I mean, we hope we're modeling for our household, our neighborhood, we hope it's a modeling, but yeah.
Let's look at some of these questions. It's Deidre wants to know, how do you all address your implicit bias, acknowledge them, and work to overcome them? Do you all think that implicit bias can be a form of self-defense? There is a book that is so funny, me and my books, called Biased. It's literally called Biased, and I don't have it around me, but it is the most intriguing thing, because the stories that she's I believe I want to say Stanford professor who wrote this book, and she talked about how there was a research thing about the police out in Oakland, and they were under investigation. I think this was around the time of like the Rodney King situation and things of that nature. But she did this whole assessment. And as she was doing the assessment, one of the officers told her a story about how he had such a bias in his mind. One day he was walking by a mirror or something on the street, and it was a big hill, and he was in undercover clothes looking scruffy, and in his mind he forgot, because that's not who he was, and he saw this person himself in the mirror, but in his mind he didn't recognize that was him, and he started to pursue this person. And at the end of the day, his own, I think it's internal implicit bias, made him think about himself as the bad guy, and recognize when he got to wherever he could recognize, oh my gosh, I'm chasing myself. And I thought that was so deep, because of what he thought like the criminal looked like.
So with that, I'm gonna tie those things in, and I smile because it's flooring to me. And so with that, the question was about, is it self-defense? I'm going to reframe it just a little bit. It's not self-defense, it's self-preservation. We're attempting to preserve something, when the realization is, intrinsically, a lot of the time there's a feeling of I'm not okay. So we're trying to preserve that. It's okay, I'm okay. And so when there's a feeling of bias, really is, there's something different about me. There's something elite about me, when realistically we are the same. Now we have differences, but as a human, typically we're about the same. So realistically, we're trying to preserve that uniqueness about us, when really connection is what allows us to move as human beings. We need other people to move. When babies are born, they literally need people to survive. Now, if it's okay, I want to share a story where there was implicit bias, where I was able to reframe someone's mind about implicit bias. Is that
Go
okay?
for it. Girl, give me drop all that.
Okay. So I had the opportunity to take part in a program in Southwest Michigan, that we would meet every month with different professionals from different organizations. Now, we're all leaders. I may have been the only person of color as a participant, and there was one leader who was a person of color. One of the meetings, we had a ride along with the police in our city. And so they were talking about this older gentleman who was a veteran and just really established, and he's like the go-to person. I said, I want to ride with him. So I went to him, I said, I want to ride with you, because I can be like that. I can be very forward. And he seemed really like nervous. I was like, okay, but I'm riding with you. So we were riding along, and he starts pulling up stuff. He talks about, yeah, there was a research in Kalamazoo that was saying that that there was some bias where we were pulling over more people of color, and then he's trying to justify it. Now, mind you, I'm not saying anything. There's no reason for him to share that, but it's self-preservation. I'm just me sitting next to you pulls up those things that causes you to question things about yourself. And then we were riding along Douglas, which is a street that kind of connects. You can take Douglas where you go in a neighborhood that is predominantly African American, low impoverished, violence at times, but it depends on where you are in that neighborhood. But that street connects all the way up to where there's some businesses where you go into West Michigan. So realistically, this street, he talked about pulling people over, and I'm getting somewhere, I promise. With that, he said, this is a place where we pull a lot of people over. I usually end up pulling people over around 8 a.m., 9 a.m. You can imagine what those people look like that I pull over. I said, yeah, professionals. He thought that I was going to say white people. I helped reframe him to say professionals, because professionals are the ones that are driving at 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. going to work. It almost made him pause a bit. It almost made him lose his breath a little bit. But with that,
necessarily
so, what it did was allow me to, even if I didn't have to do it in a softer way, it allowed me to softly just shift them just a little bit. Because contemplation, there's this thing called stages of change. There's pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and the realization pre-contemplation, somebody's not even thinking about changing.
Yeah. They may hang out in that for a long time.
They will. People. But contemplation, they're like, maybe there's a little bit of change. But realistically, just having him ponder something different, because it's motivational interviewing, it's questioning that helps shift people through that stage of change. And so the realization, that reframed, helped him think, well, maybe there's something there. So we talked about implicit bias. It's in the eye of the beholder. That's the first. The second is, you can't forcibly change somebody's bias. However, you can help asking questions to help them question their own intrinsic change, but you can't change them.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that you can only question, because when you question, you do that self-reflection. You have to think about your answer before you give it. And unless you lie to yourself. Do people do that? Like, they're like in their minds, lie to themselves, like, and then I don't know. Brooke, what is your take on implicit bias?
Oh, I love that example. I think, when you can slow down again, because part of the implicit bias is someone is not choosing to be aware, but they're not aware. And so it like seeps into actions or work. So it's just this loop. And so being able to like stop in that moment, like CG said, and just be able to question, consider, ponder, pause, draws some of that awareness. It is work. People don't like work.
It doesn't matter if we talk about implicit bias or at anywhere, just period.
Right. So I think that drawing of the awareness and being able to be connected with someone that has the patience to be able to walk through that bias is really interesting. You have so many forms of it in terms of knowledge bias. I mean, knowledge bias. There's a lot of ego that's like seeps in there, and they're all, self-preservation is part of it, but it's that lack of, it's the lack of awareness, or someone choosing not to bring awareness to the conversation. And whether, I doubt CG was bringing the awareness, hoping that he was going to just completely, but it was there in an intentional manner, And so I think that that's part of the conversation. When do we have the opportunity to bring awareness? The change can't happen like a light switch, but when can we stop, bring awareness, and engage in conversation and dialogue? Because it's a quick feedback loop in terms of the lack of awareness and how quickly it seeps into commentary and action. So
Well, I think too, CG, what
That was a very descriptive
story.
Yeah,
I'm a storyteller.
He probably did not expect to. I'm
I mean,
sure there's a whole nother like layer to that in terms of what his expectations of that car ride
you
were
know,
to be.
I was thinking that, like, CG, you get in the car with the police and you'd have made the man uncomfortable because of your body. Your brown body did that. And you're the veteran. Like, there's so many levels of like shock in that scenario, and because you know when that other person that you're engaging with is uncomfortable, and you know why they're uncomfortable when you're talking to them.
So, and with that, because of the way that I went about it, I say this not as like this is something that I was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to do. It's really just how I live. It's how I try to be. And so it wasn't to like rear up his discomfort. It was to simply be with him in the discomfort. And it's okay if you're uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with you as well, but I'm okay with being in the discomfort with you. Now, as that drive along continued, what I learned, he started sharing. And he started sharing just not about policing, he started sharing about him. The difference is when we start to learn the person. That's what connects us. And so he started telling me about his son, who happened to be ill. And I'm a Christian as well. I prayed with them, and so, or I asked if I could pray for him. And so the realization is the connection piece is when we learn who that person is, and that bias or the categorizing or that so much fluff that gets in between being able to just get to know somebody.
And that's the thing that takes time though too. And what we need to do in those situations, because what you mentioned, so there's several levels of microaggression. So the forms is like micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. And so, micro assaults are when those, like I told you, like those people that do it on purpose and are aggressive with it, like we should just drop the micro part. And then the micro insults are the verbal and non-verbal behaviors that demean a person's race, express rudeness or insensitivity. And then the other one is the micro invalidations, are forms of communication that attempt to negate, exclude, or ignore a person based on his or her race. And so for me, I think that it was similar to the concept of he wasn't insensitive. And again, I wasn't there in that situation, but he felt the need to, first of all, his discomfort was felt, but then to explain or try to explain away something that in his mind he already felt was wrong to you as a person of color. Because I feel like, do you feel like if you were a white woman or a white man, that conversation would have been the same?
I think that he would have flat out said, he wouldn't have attempted to question to say, who do you think I pull over more? I think he would have just flat out said it. If I was somebody different and feel validated in it. And so I think that he would be a lot more fluid in depicting an area or people in a way that he sees them.
And you know what? That's why it's important for people, for white people to have white people conversations if you're an ally. So like, versus having those chummy, we're going to say, whether it's the under the table racist comment or just the little flat out boom, hit you in the mouth racist comment, because you feel comfortable in your setting to do that. But when you're an ally, and again, we're having a whole discussion on allyship tomorrow, so I don't want to, and that is not my space. I am not the allyship person or anything like that. But the conversation is like, for instance, like, Brooke, have you ever had to address a situation in which you're questioning, because this is what we were just saying we want to do, is question someone so that they can work their way through either a microaggression or something that's just flat out blatantly racist or wrong?
Yes, I had that last week, and then I have a very uncomfortable conversation on Monday that I'll have to have. So last week was a potential business partnership that was seeking our support and our counselors to kind of come in and offer like kind of self-care, post-secondary type trauma to this group. And as I got into the conversation, she was speaking very fast. So I was trying to slow her back and trying to understand that we don't just get involved with business partnerships. We take time. We want to get to know you. We want to understand if this even feels like a good match for us. We were excited for the partnership. And then it came out that as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, that her business was greatly affected by that. And she, as a white woman, was traumatized by it all. And so I just, in that moment, had to decide to sort of unpeel and sit with her experience, but also how do I unfold, were you traumatized? Like maybe, but there's many more layers of trauma going on here. So we need to kind of be on the same page. So that's, I think I'm having spent many, many more conversations with you, Nicole, and just being open as a business owner and how these sort of partnerships look, and knowing that folks are coming sometimes to us to do some of this work. And what's my responsibility when I'm untangling the partnerships and what shows up in those conversations? Mm-hmm. What's my responsibility to engage with her as a human in her experience, but also like this, what are we treating here? The other piece actually addresses this question about how impactful it is to have a therapist and counselor that looks and shares similar identities. Mm-hmm. So our model, we offer folks that are interested in counseling like 1 to 3 consultations to see what the match is. Our belief is it's a match and a trust in the relationship that helps build change over time. So what we do, we've always done this. Listen, connect with a couple of our therapists. We don't want you to lily pad around and avoid whatever you're wanting to work on, but we do want you to feel like it's a match. Stage of life, race, gender, sexuality. We have a diverse staff, but we can't always assume who someone wants in front of them, and there is a personality human to human. So we had a situation recently that only one of our counselors could go on site at this particular employer to do kind of floating counseling rounds with this group. And she's a Caucasian female, and one of the directors at this particular organization checked in with her halfway through the day. How's it going? Have you been able to see all of my employees? And she said, yeah, I just wish, it's just me here. I wish I could also have a couple of my colleagues here. And he said, yeah, I heard that a couple of my employees would have really preferred having a person of color as their counselor. And I just feel like, maybe they should just get used to it, and they should just sit with you. And, why should we put a person of color in front of them? They just got to get used to it. My team member, lost herself in that moment and in that chair, and kind of gathered herself and sort of then came to me and then said, can we do that? No, we can't we're not going to force people through. If that's what was going to make that particular individual comfortable, that is really important, especially because of post-secondary trauma and everything. And it was just one of those moments now that we as an organization have to ask ourselves, okay, these employees do need some support mental health wise. Can we align with this organization? Mm-hmm. Is this better for us to pull back? And when we pull back, to be very explicit with the leadership that we are pulling back, because there's some other stuff going, but I think there's some other pieces and parts to that, but it kind of addresses that question, as well as when it comes up in our work. And, mm-hmm. I guess what I'm trying to do to also be much more direct, and it is uncomfortable. It's an organization I've worked a long time with. And so I could, there's a couple different directions, that I could just sort of passively just say, oh, we'll just make that available to her then and not address it, right?
Right.
We have therapists that could meet that need. And so let's just get that done for you and not address the commentary that had occurred in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
We have to address the commentary because it also made my therapist uncomfortable. As a team, we're trying to be much more transparent and direct and responsible for how we engage. So long story short, hope that addressed that piece. But
I know for a fact, well, that's super cool that you took that, again, moment of pause to take that internal, even and that's the business side of it, right? That's taking that concept of pause, not just internally as a person, but as a business. Because, there's so many times that people just go with the flow. And I think that this is a moment in time where, several months ago, I came down to the conclusion that there is no more going with the flow, right? Like everything should be evaluated on a very regular basis. I even told my kids, I always take things far. Like, I don't take it far, but I just need them to get the point. What TV show are we watching? Okay, because they only get it on the weekends. How many people look like you? Okay, none? Okay, what do you think about that? And literally, we will talk through the concept of why is it okay for us to be a part of a place in a world and not be present in every scenario. So like when I hear you say someone mentioned that if they would have had a person of color therapist or whatever, that they would have appreciated that more. I honestly, when my great grandmother passed away, I went through this whole grieving cycle, and I don't know the process in trying to find therapists. I usually just use my best to hear, and then but then there's some things where it's like she works, she's got kids and a husband, so I can't just be on the phone sobbing all day. I tried to seek out help. And realistically speaking, and again, I'm speaking from my perspective, and you guys have the professional perspective when it comes to like that space. But I thought I found someone because we shared some commonality in the fact that she was a Christian counselor. And CG, I told you about this, how I felt like I felt like I wanted her to care more. Like I felt like it wasn't enough care. Like, how come you haven't? I missed 2 sessions. You just gonna let me miss 2 sessions and not check up on me? And CG's like, well, it depends. And then, she walks me through the gray area that I don't live in. And so I just had to kind of let it go, because then I started in my mind thinking about, instead of where we did connect, I went through every area in which I felt like we didn't connect, which is what happens when, instead of trying to make that relationship, CG, like you were mentioning before, I kind of just cut that part off and was like, yeah, nope, she didn't call me. She didn't check on me for 2 weeks. And this why I don't want to go see her. And so I went without, right? And then when you think about people who do that from the mental health perspective, they go without because of the fact they haven't found a connection point. And then, we got hit with a question in regards to the generational trauma in itself and the residuals of our ancestors. Deidre, girl, it is 10:54 in the morning. Wow, we're going all the way there, huh? Yes, ma'am. Generational trauma is legitimately a thing that is inherited and has been transferred through many a generation. But I'm going to let you two professionals go through that, because that's deep.
Well, I'll take the generational first, and it may segue a little bit into the having a counselor that looks like you, or share some form of identity. So with that, I'm going to kind of do a both and, because I think there is generational trauma, but generational trauma, and I want to give the definition of how I look at it. Sometimes it's looked at as there are things that are passed down biologically. Now, there is some research that talks about genes that are suppressed, that when it's in the same environment, that it can be triggered. So I'll say that. I am talking specifically about the storytelling that is passed down. Storytelling that is passed down can also be, let's say, generational trauma. And I'll give you an example. I should know this name, but I'm gonna forgive myself for not knowing the name. The runner who got shot. He was just simply jogging.
Ahmaud Arbery. Yeah, Arbery. And I love the fact that that's a person of professionalism. I'm gonna allow myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna
to
be
not I forgive myself for that. So with that, so this is something that's passed down that could be passed down. There's a level of cautiousness that comes out in the form of discipline when it comes to, I'm talking specifically African American people. We tend to be individuals, you're not going to stray too far. We're not going to let you walk out after dark. There's just some things that you are not going to be able to do. I am generalizing, but I'm going to get somewhere with this. But the storytelling is that you have to be cautious so that you are not seen as a threat, or you are not doing things that are going to be threatening. How do I connect this? Because before being a mental health therapist, I also was a career counselor. And so I think of Ahmaud, and I think of him going into this construction site. I think of him looking around to think about maybe he's interested in architecture. Maybe he likes construction trade. I wonder if he thought about how the joints were put together. There's a level of creativity that comes with intrigue, questioning, straying off. There's a beauty in being able to just try things. But as a person of color, and I'm really specifically thinking about the storytelling that's passed down, we talk about you can't do this and you can't do that. And you are reared in a way that inhibits you from some creativity. So I'm not talking about when the gene is triggered, which is a thing as well. I'm talking specifically about historical information that is passed down, because even as slaves, the slaves helped communicate how you are supposed to behave, because it wasn't necessarily the mother and father that was teaching him. It was the adults that were left there to be able to rear the little ones that were there. Families were split off. And so you didn't have your mother and father specifically teaching you. You had the individuals that were there that tended to just be responsible for you. And what were they supposed to do? They were supposed to teach you how to be a good slave. And so realistically, the storytelling is passed down on how to be, how to act. And that's the difficult part, because we mix being and acting. So we've learned how to act, but that inhibits us from being who we are. So long story short, the generational trauma I look at is the storytelling that's passed down, and it inhibits creativity, which again suppresses who we are.
Hey, ag facts. Like, nah, man, you have no idea. You just took me to a whole nother place too. That concept of architecture, like, whew.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, he was a person who was intrigued about something. That's what hurt me the most. It was that, not that he went into a construction place. It was that we have suppressed the opportunity for creativity.
Ooh, CG, my heart. All right, we're Brooke.
I wanted to make sure that CG, I was curious about the then like matchmaking process and with folks in terms of their comfort, their trust, and how important, as you mentioned, like that vulnerability and that trust in that space, and what that can do to provide autonomy to then make another decision to move on to the next provider too. So I think there's this kind of leveling system where, you know, we always want to be able to have this space where this is where you feel trust and you know, this is safe right here, but what we're doing right here, we want to be able to give you, be your own best advocate, have the autonomy. And that does mean that you can then choose someone else in 10 weeks or 2 years, or add another care provider. And I was just curious about your perspective on that. And
so I do think that a therapist and a client of two different races can be matched as a fit. But I'm going to kind of preface it to like how. And so when you were talking about the rubber suit, I thought about the rubber suit not just as a bodysuit, but like head to toe. And what happens is we get mass and it's suffocating. And so when it talks about race, when things come up about race, very specifically race, it feels like at times when there's a counselor that doesn't look like you start to begin educating them, which then makes it more work when counseling should be taking load off. And so it's like you come in and you may not even want to talk about race, and they may think you do. Or when you're wanting to communicate about race, you're having to operationally define terms, share about what a cultural thing means. And so like, for instance, if I was with a client and she was talking about her son and having to have the talk, we're not talking about sex.
Right.
We're talking about how to stay safe. Or if they communicate like, what's another, discipline. Like, I'm gonna whoop his butt. They're literally not necessarily going to cause neglect or harm. They might get a spanking, but it's just cultural things that get pulled up that may feel like I gotta explain this, and that causes some sensitivity. Now, how can I be helpful in this conversation? The helpful piece in regards to having a therapist that's a different color is to be very intentional about saying, I say this in every one of my intakes because most people don't look like me, that I see specifically. I let them say, you know, our number one cause in counseling is to get you the help that you need. And the worst thing I can do is cause harm. And so I am on a board of perinatal mental health. I have tons of referrals because the best thing about counseling is the fit. You know, we all have some different education. We've all passed some tests. So we, you know, as a licensed professional counselor, that's one thing. But in order for counseling to really work, it's the fit piece. And so I want you to know that if it's not a good fit, I want you to feel comfortable with sharing because I won't get offended. I'll make sure that we find the help that you need. And so that helps them feel like, oh, shoot, I didn't know if she was the one, but if she could help me get some help. And then it also allows for that person to start feeling like, well, maybe they'll be okay. You know, and then what I would add in this situation is, you know, I know there are a lot of things that can be impactful in regards to race right now. And I know there are going to be some things that I don't understand. It's not your responsibility to teach me, but if there is something that I don't know, I want you to feel comfortable with sharing that. If that feels like too much work, I am here to help. I'm not here to put weight on you. It's okay to share what you want. It's okay to hold what you want. If there's something that I don't understand that you want to share, I am open to listening. I'll be honest and open about the things I understand. I will be honest and open about the things that I don't, but I'm willing to work to get there. And it just puts this thing like, okay, we have these differences, but there's a willingness, because the real thing is fit and will.
Well, and transparency and candor. Without, like, you kind of have suspended, there's the egos that exist in our field are they're large, to say the least. And so that ego suspension, that ability to be able to say the fit matters. I'm going to be candid with you about what I can and can't do for you, what I'm willing to do and not do for you. And also I want the best possible match and the best possible care for you. And that could mean, you know, referring you out again. And I think, I would imagine, CG, that you probably maintain a lot of clients because of your capacity to be able to suspend the ego, sit, be candid, be direct. And that is so refreshing, and people need that in their lives. I think it's probably such a foreign language.
Man.
And so probably what you're working with them on is just translating in terms of that language and starting to model that can exist. So I love hearing that. It's a very refreshing to hear that it also exists out there in the field. So I love that.
You.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that is always important in any situation is that candor, is that honesty, because honestly, who has time to like figure out what you really mean? Like when I first moved here, I thought let's go to lunch meant we should go to lunch. So I was like, oh, I was thinking, okay, I gotta make some room on my calendar. But then like 3 weeks, no lunch. Okay. But it's almost like that's like a high here. Like, you know what? Let's do lunch. I should do lunch. We should do lunch.
Oh, like a real passive aggressive, not even like sort of just a courtesy.
I don't even know.
Like you're not going to even eat the French fries and all this stuff. Like
you're not even
eating.
It's not. You're not even gonna go. You're gonna get in the car. This is like a conversation.
They're missing out because I've eaten with you, and that is a really splendid experience. So that is too bad.
Yes, I do. I like my spread, and CG, she gets down with me too in that space. I want to make sure that we end out. We're still got like 25-ish minutes, but I want to roll into another question that Donna had up a while ago in regards to how to start those conversations with those unconsciously that are practicing microaggressions, especially in social settings. And I think honestly, it was already answered with you when I don't remember which one of you guys said about, questioning. Our kids start school on Monday, and I have been overtime in this and work, but then also overtime trying to prepare as much as possible, them getting ready for school, not just like with notebooks, but no, Amaya's in high school now. So I'm like, let's talk about this. Okay, talk me through this. What do you say if this? And one of the things that I thought was really good that they've really taken to is instead of going straight in for the kill and saying, no, you're wrong about something, because right now, everything in school, or I can't say that because school hasn't started and I'm not going to put it out and project it as if it is, but there's going to be a lot of discussions about what's going on in the world. And as little brown kids, you need to know what do you understand it to be? What is your truth in it all? How do you understand it? And what feels good to hear and what feels not good to hear? And when you hear those things that are not good or not true, how do you handle it? And one of the ways, again, CG, going to your reframing part is suggesting another perspective versus saying, no, you're not right because that didn't happen, because no one wants to feel that feels attacking, right? So instead, offering it in a manner in which is like, let me suggest another perception. What if Black lives really do matter? And no one said that our lives didn't. It was just, we felt as a race that we wanted to just throw out a nice little reminder because the things in the world aren't aligning with what I think for someone whose life matters. And so, because that's another big discussion. But how would you two engage in any of the microaggressions in the social setting or any of the, I guess, corrections or that need to go on? Because one thing that we can't do is continue not to have conversation, and we can't continue to pretend like the big elephant is not in the room. Like, it's the elephants in the room, y'all. Everybody, the world. We should get like a PSA and put it on TV and just let the world know that we all acknowledge the elephant. So let's deal with it. And so how are you engaging in starting those conversations?
I can like tee it up and then I'll let CG really jam out. I'm still learning. So, and from a macro perspective in terms of like uncomfortable conversations or conflict, it's where can I practice also? I mean, I think it's important. There are spaces that are safe to engage and be vulnerable and practice.
You can practice with me, Brittany, anytime.
So that's an example in terms of, as I would say to my kids, use your words. Nicole, I would like to practice a conversation that I hope to have with a business partner next week. I know that but role playing, what we do it in a lot of our therapy in the mental health world.
It's real.
it's real, and it's just one of the most underutilized. It works and it matters. And if you have someone that's engaged in it, it doesn't have to be this huge, like mapped out process, unless you want it to be, depending on what's going on. But use your words, use your language, start in spaces where you feel safe and comfortable. And then really, you gotta just dig in and ask yourself, am I doing this just to kind of to do it in these social situations, just to try to like play around with it? Because this is not a playing around. I'm just not going to try this at the next cocktail party and like, or at the next school board meeting. This is, if you're going to engage, then it's not just a one-hit wonder. Really thinking about the investment that goes in with starting, and then that's work and constant work. Skills and work. It is a skill building experience, especially, you know, I'm speaking from a white female perspective in terms of what I'm also seeing in peer groups around white females and their ability to want to try to kind of have the conversation and then sort of move on. What I see on social media platforms, but I don't see in their real life platforms. So that's confusing. Like I see you on that platform. I don't see you here, right, or out there on that platform. And this is real. This is this real life. So that's my, you know, snapshot on that in terms of practicing and skills and being cautious and do it. Start.
Just
especially if you have a safe spot. I'm very fortunate to be able to have a handful of people in my life, and especially Nicole Jennings, and just to say it and start and do it and repeat over and over and over, because our brains
you need that. I agree 100%. And I think that it's not just, you know, white people, because I'm gonna even take it internally to myself, because like there have been times where, and I think I mentioned this yesterday in the breakout session, and this is where I've drawn my line for myself. There's no more of not speaking up, like because there's times where I'm like, nah, Nicole, I mean, yes, choose your battles, right? Like, is it worth it? Is it worth your time and energy? Because it is draining to have to go through all of that all the time. But when you see something wrong, or you have there's a teachable opportunity, I am placing myself as a responsible party to make sure that I do my part. So for instance, if we are going to be on a phone call and we're talking about how you're going to keep my kids safe at school, right? And all of a sudden at the end, 5 minutes left to go, we pick at the scab of the social injustice, but don't give it the time it deserves, instead of having a separate conversation about just that one entire situation, because that is not a 5-minute conversation. And it is a very, very sore scab. So when you touch it, be prepared for whatever comes after it. And if you don't have the time and the space to deal with that situation, we're not going to talk about that. Like, we should not do that. And that is just my perspective on giving everything the time it deserves, because it is not just keep kids safe at school right now. It's keep kids safe at school right now. And what is going on in the world racially to people of color right now, because they go hand in hand. They're both about safety. One's just germs and one's just blatant murder. So like there's so much that goes into that, but there's so many elements of correction, alternative perspective giving versus correction, because I don't want to say, no, you're wrong, but that's where my stance is, not just with schools, but with any situation, is giving an alternative perspective to what I know to be right and what to be true, because otherwise it is almost like being silent, which is probably the worst thing ever. Because again, it's not addressing the elephant in the room. So that's my cause in it all, is just being able to step outside of that. No, don't worry about it, Nicole. It's not that big of a deal, to recognize, yeah, it's that big of a deal now. What about you, Siege?
So I'm going to take it from, of course, a few different viewpoints. So I think of it in this way. I'm going to give some actual verbiage in order to address conversation, but then I'm also going to help with some reflection on what's the intent. So you were saying the word correction. I like how you reframed it to alternative. The reason being because no one likes correction. They run from discipline, even though this discipline comes from discipleship, which is teaching. But realistically, no one likes it. And so the reframe of that is you have to figure out what the intent is that situation, what kind of change you're making. There's change of safety, but then there is change of a life. So, say for instance, somebody is doing something that is going to directly harm my child, as you were saying, Nicole. There's a direct boundary that has to be made, and that boundary is firm. It's helping them say, this is going to happen, this is not going to happen. There are times for that. And there are times when we are attempting to impact change of a life. And so when I say impact change of a life, I'm thinking about relationship. I'm coming all back to relationship, because relationship is where that change actually happens. Brooke and I probably can agree with this. We love you, Nicole. And so we know that we have a friendship there. So with that, if you said something that feels a little off, I was like, no, I know she didn't mean that. Nicole, did you just da-da-da-da? And then you're like, no, because we have that relationship. But if we didn't have that relationship, I could say, well, she said, nah, I'm not messing with her anymore. But relationship helps for offense to not take precedence. It allows offense to be subdued. Now, how do you do that? Now, I'm going to say this may be controversial, and I'm okay with that. And the reason I say that is because controversy means that you think a little bit different, and it isn't necessarily, I don't think that we always have to say, this is what you should think. A lot of times we feel as if agreement means, or validation is agreement, and it's two totally different things.
Absolutely.
I can validate how you feel head to toe. That's what I do as a living. But it doesn't mean I agree. And so I'm going to give you wording to help with these conversations, especially as a person of color, because you're going to hear some things that may be sideways, and it may not be from a place of ill will. It may be just of being unaware or uneducated about that experience. And so when a person of color hears something that is a sandpaper rub, and that person shares it, and you have some form of relationship or attempting to develop a relationship with that person, it doesn't feel like it's a safety matter. This is what you say. What I heard you say is, and you reframe what they say. Did I get that right? Because what that does is it helps them hear themselves. Like, wait, did I really mean that? But this is the kicker. If they say, yeah, what we have to do is validate and put ourselves in their shoes. And it sucks sometimes. But you try to find something that connects you. All right. So what I hear you saying is that you think Black Lives Matter is a political movement and it's evil. Did I get that right? Well, I think I can understand what you mean. I could imagine that you feel that way because there's a lot of things on TV that's depicting it as negative, with the riots and things of that nature. I hear you. Now, what you've done is you softened him like, yeah, okay. And now you're like, and never say but, because but negates everything you said beforehand.
I tell them that all the time.
And you could say, I feel hurt when people say that Black Lives Matter is a political movement, because it makes it feel as if me being a person no longer matters. Or you can preface it with a question. And I wonder if, the organization and the movement may be a bit different. What are your thoughts about that? So you say, and you can share what you feel if you feel safe enough, or you could share a question to learn more. Because the more it's motivational interviewing, you really figuring out what they are thinking. How are they feeling? And what you do is you are literally allowing them to work out their own stuff. They're really just hearing their own stuff. Because what happens is, when you say, did I get that right? They have to own it. So I summarize it with this. Just because you validate somebody does not mean that you agree with them. And that's okay if we disagree. The biggest thing is being able to understand how they feel. Did what they communicate, is that actually what they meant? And giving them the opportunity to reframe it if it wasn't. And then validating how they feel. Now, if it's so far-fetched that you can't find something that you can put yourself in their shoes, you can say, so what you're saying is this, this, this. And I'm having a difficult time understanding or imagining it. Can you help me understand? So those are my 2 cents.
Man, we got to do this. It's like trying to ask Trump supporters what they admire about Trump. Yikes.
Yeah, it is the old like help me understand.
Help me understand.
Walk me through that. It also helps you physiologically try to ground yourself in a moment where you might have become incredibly dysregulated. So I think part of that is like, okay, my heart rate is beating, my stomach is churning, whatever is being triggered right there. As you practice it and as you kind of use some of those suggestions, it gives you, help me understand that.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Yeah.
Walk me through that. And then you're kind of like doing some stuff in your head to decrease that heart, breathe in, breathe out, whatever it takes in that moment. But
hey, that though, I'm going to actually use that with my kids because it's like, Mommy, where do I put this? Well, this is what I tell them. If I were the cereal, where would you put me? Like, if you were the cereal, where would you want to go? Like, on the cabinet. Like, but like you let them kind of like work their way through it. One thing I want to,
and I would say, sorry, in detaching from the outcome. I think there's a speak your truth, own your truth, sit in the truth, detach from the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
However the conversation. Yeah, because that's can get all twirled up in between the moment that you're able to walk through some of those first moments of dialogue, and it keeps you in the present too. When you detach from that outcome, you can stay present moment connected and not be concerned about that next step. So.
And you won't have any expectations attached either, because that's difficult to work through when you want something to look a certain way. Mm-hmm. When you have a conversation that doesn't end up that way, and then you have your own, you walking away feeling heavier than lighter, like you said, detaching. Have you ever really been enraged, either one of you guys, by a microaggression in the workplace? And how do you work through that? I know for myself, I have had several. The door handle thing is old now, but it really happens still to this day. I think it happened like last week or something like that. Someone had their hand on the door, opened the door, saw me, and their inside went, and then they, that they didn't come in. But one of them is, as a person who creates a business based around customer service, and the concept of going out of the way to be nice and make you feel comfortable. That's not just a facade. That's just like what we are I'm training them to do. It's about building relationships, because we're trying to empower women through clothing. And so when people come in and I'm like, trying to engage, so one might be an example of me giving you a compliment about like, I remember this. Oh, that is a beautiful white suit you have on. It's perfect for the weather. And the response is, well, it is warm outside. Wait, ma'am. What I think you meant to say was thank you, but something else happened in that channel of conversation in your head, and what I said and the way it hit you and your response to me. And so that kind of fired me up. And honestly, the way that I handled it in that moment was I fell way back off of who I was, of that relationship building, and let her be. And I didn't try to push it. And I probably would do something similar now, but what I tell people all the time, I think of my store as my house. You coming in my store and me not speaking to you is like you walking through my front door and I look at you and going about my business. That that's not going to happen. And so my expectation for everyone is to do the same. So when you have to quick pivot in that moment, it can throw you off when you're dealing with someone's a little funky. How have you guys dealt with that? And I think we got like 5 minutes, but how have you guys dealt with having to pivot in that moment of, wow, just being thrown flat out off?
Is it okay if I go, Brooke? So I'll say it in this, and I'm long-winded. I'm trying to be quick. So I was when I worked actually in an organization, I had a white gentleman who wanted me to apply for a full-time position. I worked part-time, and I did it specifically because I wanted to have more time with my boys. And he was trying to push, like, infer, say directly, keep questioning me applying for this position, where it started to feel uncomfortable because he wanted a person of color to be in it. But he wasn't necessarily one that was, I'm not at your house. We're not having conversations. We don't talk on the phone. And so it was really like we didn't have a relationship. Why is this a microaggression? Because you feel as if you can tell me how I should be living my life when I have told you that I do not want the position because I am settled. So how do I deal with it? I can show you better than I can tell you. And
Granny used to say that.
I know. And so with that, I just basically remembered who I was first, and that it was not my responsibility to appease him. And so the realization is me being settled in myself allowed me to understand that his stuff is his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I am settled in what I am doing and who I am. And I left it at that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you follow peace, there's no questioning at that point.
Yeah. And when you follow yourself, and I think that just doesn't come out of the sky. I imagine that CG has, I think your entire life in determining how that core and that center and that place that you can come back to in those moments, to know that your values, your belief, who you are going in this direction, and no one is steering me otherwise. And so, I would say it takes, again, a lot of work, and probably, I always say that I'm not my own brain surgeon. So my therapist, my business coach, my people that I have explicitly selected to be objective, to give me the space, to call me out, to sit with me, to practice my own shit over and over. And when I think I've hit a new growth spurt and I've evolved again, I have more. And so part of that centering and knowing who you are comes with being vulnerable and doing the work. So life doesn't have to be that hard. So CG can be like, no, thanks. I'm good. I don't need that job. It shouldn't be that hard. And I think the hard work does pay off. The outcomes do show up. You feel it, you live it, you breathe it. It is so easy to be like, no, thank you. But it is still making intentional connections behind the scenes to make sure you're doing that yourself for all the roles that we have. I think as women in general, we have a lot, and as women who want to impact our communities and the world, all the roles that we wear, all that, hats deserve that space where we can sit with ourselves and make sure we're still connected with who we are and what we came to do. So
absolutely. And that's exactly what's happening here today. Yes. I mean, this situation right here, we might need to take this on the road, y'all. This was good. No, I mean, because like the conversation, first of all, it was organic and authentic. Even though we had a topic and an anchor, I think that when it comes from our different roles and life perspectives and situations, all three of us bring so much to the table and from different perspectives. And I think that that's the thing that people need to see more of, is that just like you said, Siege, like we have all these perspectives, and I'm sure if we all threw them on the table, some stuff would be like oil and water, but that doesn't mean I don't love you any more or any less because of that. If your differences are unique to you, Brooke's differences are unique to you, but together we're still so much stronger together, and even having the conversations that are not easy to have, but are necessary to have. And so that's what we just did in an hour and a half with some amazing questions. Thank you guys for engaging, and we are on time, and which is a rarity for me. So that's a win for the day if I don't do anything else. We are on time. And so I just want to thank both of you guys for such deep and needed and necessary and cathartic conversation in regards to microaggressions. And again, I really think we should do this again. But if we don't, we got this on recording and it's going on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Of
You guys
course.
have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.